The SSIS DB catalog is a container. It is now available for SSIS packages as well as projects. This is an initial setup that is needed. Then everything else depends on the project and packages that are deployed. The catalog is a database. Its name is going to be SSIS DB, and you cannot change that name. There is a new folder in Management Studio, or what we'll refer to as SSMS. This is for administration of the container database for your projects, packages, as well as the environment. The database container can assist with version management and database and restore capabilities. There's even an always-on enhancement for disaster recovery. The new feature in deploying is for packages, or what they're calling incremental deployments. This is a feature that's very helpful for those with many packages in a single project or multiple projects. But when you only change one or two of the packages that need to be pushed out for people to use. The catalog has features including debugging information and the logging of errors. These errors and logs can be viewed in a dashboard or individual reports which are canned with SQL Server Management Studio. This takes a huge chunk of time out of package development as well as project deployments with the debugging and logging built in. In SQL Server 2016, database connectivity and SSIS through project parameters and project connection managers enable a single deployment to one instance, and then you can change the configuration without the old configuration files in order to point the package or packages to a deployment instance, or maybe a QA instance, or even the production machine. There are some performance issues that might arise from this, so use caution and you want to watch for what you do there. SQL Server Data Tools is the environment you develop SQL Server Integration Services packages. For 2016, it is the shell of the Visual Studio 2015. Here, we're now given a better way to control the deployment version of SQL Server in the IDE itself. This was a big enhancement for SQL Server 2016. We will also end this session with other enhancements to the SSIS catalog and integration services deployments. We're going to talk a little more about the catalog, which is the container in SQL Server 2016 for deployed projects and packages. The SSIS DB catalog has enhanced SQL Server since version 2012. This feature enables many things that help management of packages and projects. We are able to use project connection managers and project parameters for the configuration outside of the old configuration files. There is now a database named SSISDB that will be created. The main objects in the catalog are projects and packages. These are deployed from SQL Server Data Tools when designing ETL packages. After a deployment, sometimes the packages fail. This is okay because the project now can be reverted back to the last good run without having to find the previous package in source control and then make another deployment over the current one that has failed. By right-clicking on a package or project, the previous deployments in the catalog are listed. Now you can revert to a previous one listed in the package. Be cautious here though, because this is not source control. Please use something like Team Foundation Server or a similar application for managing versions of development with a good DevOps workflow. Also, there are environments. These are the answers to a single deployed package to one instance and then enabling the ability to change the parameter values or variable values in a project or a package. These are set up in the catalog and then associated with a particular project. Parameters are matched to the project parameter or package variable. This helps change the values outside of the IDE development canvas. Before we can use the catalog for versions of projects and packages, it first has to be created. The catalog is created through SQL Server Management Studio by using the GUI. You can also use T-SQL to create this as well. Right-clicking on the new folder in Management Studio for SQL Server 2016 is called Integration Services Catalog. This folder, by right-clicking, will bring up the Create Catalog dialog. The SSIS-DB catalog database will be created through this path. The configuration is very important for busy systems, though the wizard does give you some defaults. But the first thing needed is enabling CLR on the instance. You can have an Integration Services Store Procedure launch on SQL Server Startup if needed, but it's not a requirement. This enables you to help configure the way the catalog is used, but is an advanced option. The database name cannot be changed, but it does exist, so it's very possible that future SQL Server releases will enable having multiple catalogs, right? The most important thing to remember, though, is lastly, you provide a master password for this database. It's very important because at one point you might encrypt this database, and you might also move the database to another server or put it on a new version of SQL Server. With any password, you need to store it in a safe and available container. Lastly is the configurations after the creation of the database. These options are available by going to the properties of the Integration Services Catalog from SQL Server Management Studio. The Clean Logs Periodically property can be set to true or false. This enables or disables a SQL Server agent job that runs on a scheduled time. The retention period in days indicates how long a job will keep the history of the executions of the packages. So you want a low number if you run packages frequently, like every 15 minutes or every hour. But you can make it high if the execution of packages is every day or say once a week. The descriptions of the server-wide default logging levels can be seen in Books Online for more details, but it is basically how verbose you want the logging. You can get the very detailed or you can get very basic. The maximum number of versions per project indicates how many deployments will be saved to the catalog of the project. Purging these versions can be controlled by the property periodically remove all versions. Let's look at a demonstration of creating the SSIS DB catalog. First, we're going to launch SQL Server Management Studio. Once this launches, we'll connect to an instance where the catalog has not been created. In this case, we're using an instance called SQL 16 SP1. We're going to maximize this so we can fill the screen up. And if you notice, there's a new folder for SQL Server 2016 called Integration Services Catalogs. If we right-click on this, we get a Create Catalog menu. Once we click it, it then gives us the dialog to fill out the information. The first thing we need to do is enable CLR integration. Without doing that, you are unable to create the catalog. There is an option to enable automatic execution of a store procedure on startup, but this is not a requirement, though it does give you the ability to customize your catalog deployment. The next is a prompt for SSIS DB catalog database name. You are not able to change this. And then password, which you have to provide in order for it to create this. We're not going to create this. I'm going to click cancel, and I'm going to connect to one that's already been created. if I right click on that catalog, I can go to the properties of it. So if you notice, I drilled in to the integration services catalog, and then I see SSIS DB. This is an indication that in the future, you're probably going to be able to manage more than one catalog. Say one for development, one for QA, and one for production. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'll right click on SSIS DB and go to the properties. So the initial configuration is to create the catalog itself. But now we have more details about the catalog itself. You can see some general information on top, which you cannot change. You also see that you can use encryption, always encrypted, on this particular database. Here's your first property you can change, which is clean logs periodically. If it's true, it means that the old retention periods are deleted from the catalog. But if you change it to false, then you're not going to be able to have it clean up periodically through a SQL Server agent job. It would be an advanced topic if you want to do that yourself. The next thing is the log for retention period in days. These are the number of days that the details and messages are stored in this catalog. If you don't want to clean it, you just put that first property to false. But this gives you how many days to retain. You might want to bump it up to something like 700, or if you're not really concerned about keeping the logs over time, you could change it from 30. I can tell you from personal experience, it's good to keep as much as you can, but you need to balance it on the size of the database and the maintenance you need to perform on it. Remember, when you create this catalog, it actually creates a database. We'll look at that database in just a second. Nice inside of the catalog is a performance of packages. So if you only keep 30 days, then all you see is the performance in the last 30 days. You might want to look at the performance over a year. So it's kind of a balancing act. The next one is a server-wide default logging level. It defaults to basic. You can also have none, which is very limited logging, just the performance, verbose, or there's even a new one called runtime lineage, which is more an advanced topic. We're going to keep basic. It's going to give us the performance and the verbose. Next is the maximum number of versions per project. So as you deploy this, which we'll see later, this is the number of versions retained that you can revert back to or move forward. There's also one, periodically remove old versions. If this is set to true, then that number above will allow only 10 deployments at any one time. But if you change it to false, then that number is not used and all of them are retained. I'm going to go ahead and click cancel, and I'm going to drill into the databases on this instance, and you'll see a new one called SSISDB. Here's the tables that it uses, which you would assume they'd be in the system tables, but they're not. So you can actually query these yourself. There's also views. So if you don't want to dig into the tables themselves, you can actually go to the view and you see catalog.executables or catalog.executions. So the views might be a little more readable of the data output than the tables themselves. So be sure to review both. And probably what you're not going to want to mess with is the actual store procedures, because some of them update stuff, or even the functions themselves. The last thing to look at is under security and under roles. There are some new roles that are created. You notice here SSISDB admin, failover monitoring agent, as well as the log reader. So in SQL Server 2016, you have two new roles. In previous versions, you only had the admin role. Now you have one specific for developers that can just do log reader. In SQL Server 2016, we have the ability to deploy a package in a project rather than the whole project itself, with just the updated package or packages. This caused headaches for ETL, extract, transform, and load developers, as well as business intelligence architects from all around the world using SQL Server. Some projects contain tens or hundreds of packages because they mainly want to share project parameters and connection managers. When only one or two of these packages were changed, it was required that the whole project needed to get redeployed. So, multiple versions were visible in the catalog with no changes between the versions. This is called by Microsoft incremental deployment. If you remember in the previous session, we talked about the retention period. So if you had a retention period of 10 and a particular package was not changed during the last 10 deployments, then you wouldn't see any previously deployed one. It also kind of clutters up the ability to use that retention inside of the catalog itself. Changing parameters can be accomplished now with project parameters. This has been available since SQL Server 2012. A good example is using the connection manager and project parameters to change the instance running from the source data or the destination databases. So now you can develop against development databases, deploy to a catalog, and then change the parameters when executing. So the project parameter has a new instance name for production and a new instance name or database name for production. You can even use that with QA. These can be changed in a SQL Server agent job or scripting the launch of a package from SQL Server Management Studio. Executing the package or packages from SQL Server Integration Services can display a progress report. This RDL-like report is canned within SQL Server Management Studio. There's also a dashboard accessible from the Integration Services folder in SQL Server Management Studio. These, as I like to call them, canned reports, can show running, failed, or succeeded packages with the ability to drill down to more detail, like a performance chart or detailed messages to look to see what the error was. Next is a demonstration of using project parameters and the connection manager, deploying the project as well as running the project with an initial report. First, we'll launch the solution already created for project parameters. This is going to launch Visual Studio 2015, the IDE related to SQL Server Data Tools. In this, we'll have a parent package that's going to launch a dimension load for category, subcategory, and product. If we go to the dimension subcategory, we'll notice in the connection managers on the bottom of the package that there's 3. And they're all labeled with a prefix of open parentheses project, close parentheses. So what that is the connection manager in your solution or project manager. Here, you're able to create connection managers that are shared between projects. So starting with 2012, you're now able to share connections between packages. This is a great blessing for people who develop packages. You don't have to have a template to make sure your connections are created. If we were to launch this, we could just right click on parent project and execute, and it should execute those 3. We have a parent package that launches each individual package. That way, when we create something in SQL Server Agent, we just launch the parent package rather than the individual dimension packages. And this should launch successfully all 3 of those packages. We'll see the green check marks as each one goes by, and we see success. So we're going to close that, and I'm going to close all these packages, which really I can right click and say close all documents. I'm going to double click this project parameters. It's actually a file that's within our SSIS package parameters project. And here we'll see we have a destination database parameter, destination server, source database, source server, and our stage data warehouse. That database is going to stay the same, but our source server is going to be different. It's our instance SQL 16. The same thing for our destination server, and our source database is actually ADV16. We're using an AdventureWorks 2016 example for the source. We have a small data warehouse for our destination. So we created these project parameters, and those project parameters are shared between packages. So we don't have to create variables in individual projects. So now I'm going to save my project parameters, which I've changed. And now I'm going to go into one of the packages, and I can click on one of the connections. The first one I'm going to click on is the ADV16. And if I go over to properties over here in expressions, I can click the little ellipse and it brings up a dialog for me. If I roll down the property, I can actually change the whole connection string to use these parameters. But what's easier is to go to initial catalog for the database, click on the ellipse next to the expression, and you'll see those project parameters. So this is our source database, ADV16. So I'm going to go grab source database project parameter, drag it down into the expressions, and click evaluate expression. And I see the value that it evaluated. Now I'm also going to pick server name. So these are actually two properties within the total connection string, and I'm able to change those without having to edit the actual full connection string of the database source. So I'm going to drag down source server, evaluate it, make sure it's correct, click OK. Now I can do that with small database as well. We'll pick the initial catalog as our small DW. That's actually our destination database, small DW, and I'll also change the server. So if this is getting your mind going, you can say, hey, I can create these project parameters. They're related to all four packages in this project, and I change it one place when I execute, and now it executes for everything. And I'm able to separate my destination database and server from my source database and server. I could even do that with my stage if I wanted to. And this is very typical in most data warehouse environments that I'm familiar with. Now my stage is, first of all, the initial catalog is going to be my stage DW property or parameter. But I'm going to put it on the destination server. That way my stage is on the same one as my destination. That way it's a little bit quicker if I have to ever do joins between them. Evaluate it to make sure it's correct. Now I change that on the parent package DTSX file. Even though I change it on this package, if I go into dim subcategory, you'll see that little function sign next to each of the connections below there. So when I changed it once, it actually inherited it throughout every one of these databases. Now I'm going to go ahead and execute it just to make sure all those changes are correct. So this will be if I'm developing. I'm developing to see if it all works fine, and it does. I'm going to close that or stop the processing, close all documents, and then I'm going to deploy this. So I'm going to right click on my project in my Solution Explorer for the solution, and I'm going to click deploy. What this is going to give me is a wizard to do the deployment of this project. So it's introducing me, tell me what my 5 steps are. When I click next, it already knows the source, and it's already been selected since we're doing the whole project. So it immediately goes to the destination. Here I'm able to pick my server name, which is going to be the SQL 16 instance. It's also going to remember the last one I deployed it to, but what I'm going to do is browse, go to SSISDB, and create a new folder. I'll call it LearnNowOnline. Now I'll highlight that one, click OK, and click Next. It lets me review this and then deploy. Now if I go to SQL Server Management Studio, drill down into the Integration Services Catalog, and the SSISDB, I'll see that Learn Now Online folder. And if I drill into there, I can see the projects as well as the environments, and then I also see each individual package listed. What we're going to do right now, since it's deployed, I'm just going to right click on Dim Catalog and click Execute. Now this is going to bring up a wizard to do the execution, but if you notice, the project parameters are listed even though I'm just launching the package. So here during the launch I can actually change this. So if SQL 16 was not my production and I want to run this on production, I have an ellipse where I can change that. Once I change it and click OK, I can hit the script button, And what that does is gives me a T-SQL script on how to execute this package. It shows that I have to have a package name. It returns the execution ID, which is output. It's a folder name, a project name. Do I want to use 32-bit, just in case there's some 32-bit references? And then it actually creates this execution. Now, it hasn't been executed until it runs the set execution parameter value. Well, this is setting the parameter values first, and then it's actually starting the execution. Now, this is async, so when you execute it, you immediately get an OK. So in order to track what's going on, you would have to loop with the execution ID, checking the status of that execution. We're not going to do that right now. I'm going to bring back up the wizard, and I'm going to click OK. And we immediately get a prompt, do we want to see a report? And I'm going to click yes, and hopefully it hasn't finished just yet. But the report will tell us where it is. The status is succeeded. So if it was running, it would say status running. If it was failed, it would say status failed. And then in this case, it has already succeeded. Here's where I can view messages and even the performance. The performance I really like because I can watch this over time to see how successful the launching of my package is. So here we reviewed the project parameters as well as connection managers, deploying a project and running from the package inside a SQL Server Management Studio. The report was real nice, and we even got a look at the T-SQL script you're able to use to execute, in this case, create execution, set parameters, and then start the execution.